The dust-laden horizon seemed to mock Sadie Miller as she clutched her tattered shawl against the brisk Montana wind, her gaze fixed on the white steeple rising above the sleepy town of Redemption Creek. The church bell tolled, calling the faithful to Sunday service, but Sadie couldn't bring herself to climb those weathered steps, not with the weight of her past bearing down on her shoulders like an anvil. It was 1878, a time when a woman's reputation was her most valuable possession, and Sadie's had been shattered beyond repair. She stood frozen at the edge of town, watching families in their Sunday best filing into the church, their faces bright with purpose and belonging everything she had lost. "You planning on wearing a hole in that dirt with your pacing, miss?" The deep voice startled her from behind. Sadie whirled around, coming face to face with a tall figure silhouetted against the morning sun. His broad shoulders were draped in a dusty duster coat, and the brim of his Stetson cast shadows across features that were both rugged and kind. "I wasn't pacing," she replied defensively, though her boot marks in the dust betrayed her lie. "Name's Owen Galloway," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that felt foreign to Sadie after so many months of scorn. "Most folks call me Gall on account of my stubborn nature." "Sadie Miller," she offered cautiously, her eyes darting toward the church again. The doors were closing now, and she felt a strange mixture of relief and regret. Owen followed her gaze. "Service is about to start. Pastor Reynolds gives a fine sermon if you're of a mind to hear it." Sadie's laugh was brittle. "I doubt I'd be welcome." Something in her tone made Owen study her more carefully, taking in her threadbare dress and the way she held herself like someone expecting a blow. "God's house is open to all," he said simply, "not to women like me." The words escaped before she could catch them, hanging in the air like gunsmoke. To her surprise, Owen didn't press. Instead, he replaced his hat and nodded toward a small cafe down the street. "Well, Miss Miller, I reckon if you won't go to him, perhaps we could have ourselves a cup of coffee instead, best in the territory according to those who know such things." His casual kindness disarmed her. "Why would you want to have coffee with someone you just met?" "Someone you know nothing about." Owen's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I know you're standing out here looking like you've lost your last friend, and I know my mama raised me never to leave someone in distress. That's enough for now." Against her better judgment, Sadie found herself walking beside him toward Mabel's cafe, his steady presence somehow anchoring her in the present when all she'd been doing for months was running from her past. The cafe was mercifully empty, most of the town being at church. Mabel herself, a round woman with flour-dusted hands, raised an eyebrow at Owen but said nothing about his companion. "2 coffees, Mabel, and some of those buttermilk biscuits if you've got them," Owen said, directing Sadie to a table by the window. "Coming right up, Gall," Mabel replied, her curious eyes lingering on Sadie. Once seated, an awkward silence fell between them. Sadie stared at her weathered hands, wondering what this stranger would think if he knew her story, the scandal that had driven her from her home in Philadelphia, the desperate journey west in search of anonymity, the struggle to survive with no family and a tarnished name. "You're new to Redemption Creek," Owen observed, not a question but an invitation to speak if she wished. "Arrived on yesterday's stage," Sadie admitted. "I'm looking for work." "What kind of work? Any kind that'll pay. I can cook, clean, mend. I was a teacher back east, but—" She trailed off, the familiar shame rising like bile. Owen nodded thoughtfully. "Ranch work is hard to come by for a woman, but the Harvey house down at the train depot might be hiring. Or there's Mrs. Bloomfield's boarding house. She's always needing help with the laundry." Mabel arrived with their coffee and a plate of steaming biscuits. "Anything else for you and your friend, Gall?" "This is perfect, thank you, Mabel," Owen replied with pointed courtesy. When she retreated, Sadie whispered, "She doesn't approve of me being here with you." Owen shrugged. "Mabel doesn't approve of much. She still thinks dancing leads straight to damnation." His easy smile faded as he studied Sadie's face. "But something tells me it's not just Mabel's disapproval you're worried about." Sadie sipped her coffee, buying time. "Mr. Galloway, Owen, please." "Owen, then. I appreciate the coffee and the conversation, but I should be clear. I'm not looking for anything more than work and a quiet place to live. My past is complicated, and I don't wish to drag anyone else into it. Fair enough. He broke a biscuit in half and pushed the plate toward her. But everyone in Redemption Creek has a past, Miss Miller. Some just hide it better than others. There was something in his tone, not judgment, but understanding, that made Sadie look up and truly see him for the first time. Owen Galloway was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with eyes the color of a summer storm and a face weathered by sun and wind. A scar ran along his jaw, disappearing into the collar of his shirt, hinting at stories of his own. "What about you?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "What's your story?" Simple enough. Fought for the Union, came west after the war, worked cattle for a few years before buying my own spread. The Silver Creek Ranch isn't much compared to some, but it's mine, free and clear. And your family. A shadow crossed his face. Lost my parents to fever when I was 14. No siblings, no wife, he smiled faintly. Just me and about 60 head of stubborn longhorns. I'm sorry about your parents, Sadie said softly. It was a long time ago. Owen finished his coffee. What about you? Anyone waiting back east? No one, Sadie replied, the word hollow in her mouth. Not anymore. The church bells rang again, signaling the end of the service. Sadie tensed, aware that the cafe would soon fill with churchgoers, people who would wonder about the strange woman sitting with Owen Galloway. I should go, she said, rising abruptly. Owen stood as well, dropping coins on the table. Where are you staying? The boarding house near the station for now. Let me walk you back. Sadie wanted to refuse, to maintain the distance that had become her shield, but something about Owen's steady presence made her nod in acceptance. They walked in silence through the awakening town, past the general store with its display of canned goods and bolts of fabric, past the blacksmith's where the forge was cold for the Sabbath, past the saloon with its shuttered windows. All the while, Sadie felt eyes upon her, curious, judging, speculating. They'll talk, she murmured, about you being seen with me. Owen's stride didn't falter. Let them. Nothing better to do in a small town than talk. At the boarding house steps, Sadie turned to face him. Thank you for the coffee and for not asking questions. I reckon when you're ready to tell your story, you will, Owen replied, tipping his hat. In the meantime, if you're serious about work, I could use someone to help around the ranch house. My housekeeper, Mrs. Gunderson, is laid up with rheumatism and the place is falling to ruin. Sadie blinked in surprise. You'd hire me, knowing nothing about me? I know enough. His eyes held her steadily. You're running from something and you need a fresh start. That's all I need to know for now. The job's yours if you want it, room and board plus $5 a week. It was a generous offer, more than she'd hoped for. I'll think about it, Owen nodded. I'll be in town on Wednesday for supplies. You can give me your answer then. He turned to go, then paused. And Miss Miller. Whatever you're running from, it doesn't define you, not unless you let it. With that, he was gone, striding down the dusty street toward where his horse was hitched outside the general store. Sadie watched him go, a strange feeling fluttering in her chest, something like hope, fragile and frightening. Inside her sparse room at the boarding house, Sadie unpacked her meager belongings, a few worn dresses, a hairbrush with several missing bristles, a faded daguerreotype of her parents, and a small Bible she hadn't opened in months. The latter she tucked beneath her pillow, unable to face the verses that once brought her comfort. 3 days later, Sadie found herself perched beside Owen on his wagon, bouncing along the rutted trail that led to Silver Creek Ranch. She'd accepted his offer, partly out of necessity. The boarding house had been expensive, and partly because something about Owen Galloway made her feel safe for the first time in a very long while. It's not much to look at, Owen said as they crested a rise, revealing a modest homestead nestled in a valley of golden grass. A creek wound through the property like a silver ribbon, feeding a small stand of cottonwoods that provided shade for the ranch house and barn. It's beautiful, Sadie said honestly, taking in the peaceful scene. The house itself was simple, but solid, a two-story structure built of rough-hewn logs with a wide porch and glass windows that caught the afternoon sun. Outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, a smokehouse, a chicken coop, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse, though Owen had mentioned he currently employed only 2 ranch hands. The men live in the bunkhouse, Owen explained as they approached. Mrs. Gunderson has a room off the kitchen, but she's staying with her daughter in town until her joints improve. You'll have her room, it's small but private. Sadie nodded, her stomach fluttering with nerves. This was the closest thing to a home she'd have since leaving Philadelphia, and the thought was both comforting and terrifying. As they pulled up to the house, one of the ranch hands emerged from the barn, a weathered man with a shock of white hair and a limp. "This is Hank," Owen said as they climbed down from the wagon. "Been with me since I bought the place. Hank, this is Miss Miller. She'll be taking over for Mrs. Gunderson for a while." Hank touched the brim of his hat. "Madam, good to have a woman's touch around here again." "Place has gone to the dogs since Mrs. G left." "He's not exaggerating," Owen admitted as he led Sadie into the house. "I'm afraid housekeeping isn't my strong suit." The interior of the ranch house was spacious but Spartan, with a large main room that served as both parlor and dining area. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold now in the summer heat, but clearly the heart of the home during winter months. The furniture was sturdy but plain, a sofa covered in faded chintz, a pine dining table with 6 mismatched chairs, and a desk piled high with ledgers and correspondence. "Kitchen's through there," Owen said, gesturing to a doorway. "Your room is just beyond it. Upstairs are 2 bedrooms, mine and a spare, and there's a pump out back for water. The privy's behind the smokehouse." Sadie took it all in, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. The floors needed sweeping, the windows washing, and judging by the stack of dishes in the kitchen sink, meal preparation had been haphazard at best since Mrs. Gunderson's departure. "I'll start with the kitchen," she said, removing her bonnet and rolling up her sleeves. Owen watched her with something like amusement. "You don't waste time, do you?" "Time is all I have, Mr. Galloway," she replied, then softened her tone. "Besides, I suspect you and your men would appreciate a proper supper tonight." "That we would." "I'll bring in your trunk and then get back to work. The cattle won't move themselves to the north pasture." Left alone in the house, Sadie threw herself into cleaning with a vengeance, as if she could scrub away her own troubled thoughts along with the dust and grime. By late afternoon, the kitchen gleamed. A stew simmered on the stove, and she discovered enough ingredients to bake a passable apple pie. When Owen and the ranch hands returned at dusk, their appreciation for her efforts was evident in their wide eyes and wider smiles. "If I'd known what we were missing, I'd have hired you months ago," Owen declared as he washed up at the pump outside. Dinner was a revelation for Sadie. The men's easy conversation, their obvious respect for Owen, and their sincere gratitude for her cooking created an atmosphere of warmth she hadn't experienced in a long time. They asked few questions, seeming to take their cue from Owen, who steered the conversation toward ranch matters and local gossip. After the meal, when the hands had returned to the bunkhouse and the dishes were washed, Sadie found herself alone with Owen on the porch, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars emerged like diamonds scattered across black velvet. "Thank you," Owen said quietly, "for dinner. It was just a simple stew. For bringing life back to this place." He gestured to the house behind them. "It's been too quiet here." Sadie didn't know how to respond to the sincerity in his voice. "It's a good place, your ranch, peaceful. That's why I bought it, after the war." He trailed off, his eyes distant. "Needed somewhere quiet to put down roots." "Were you in many battles?" Sadie asked, curious about the scar on his jaw. "Too many," Owen replied, then with a faint smile added, "but this was from a disagreement with a horse, not a rebel bullet." Sometimes the wildest battles are the ones closest to home. Something in his words struck a chord in Sadie, reminding her of her own battles not with bullets and bayonets, but with expectations and reputation, with the crushing weight of scandal and shame. "I was engaged," she found herself saying, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Back in Philadelphia, to a man from a good family, everyone said I was fortunate to make such a match, being an orphan with only a modest inheritance. Owen remained silent, giving her space to continue or stop as she chose. His name was Theodore Palmer, a banker's son with political ambitions. Sadie's voice grew bitter. He was charming, handsome, everything a young woman is taught to want, and I believed him when he said he loved me. She paused, gathering courage. 3 weeks before our wedding, I discovered he had another arrangement with a woman across town, a woman who was expecting his child. Owen's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I confronted him. He denied it at first, then became angry, said I was being hysterical. Sadie's hands twisted in her lap. When I threatened to break our engagement, he changed tactics, said he would ruin me, make sure no respectable man in Philadelphia would have me. Did he hurt you? Owen asked, his voice dangerously quiet, not physically. But when I returned his ring the next day, he was true to his word. He spread rumors, horrible accusations about my virtue, my sanity, even suggested I had been with other men. By the week's end, I was shunned by everyone who mattered in society. My teaching position was terminated. Even my landlady asked me to leave. So you came west, Sadie nodded. As far as I could go on what remained of my savings, I thought I could start fresh where no one knew me. But the shame follows. I feel it every time someone looks at me, wondering about my past, judging me for being alone, unprotected. Is that why you wouldn't enter the church? You think God judges you for something that wasn't your fault. It's not God's judgment, I fear, Sadie admitted. It's everyone else's. Owen was silent for a long moment, the only sound the distant lowing of cattle and the chorus of crickets in the grass. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. There's something you should know about Redemption Creek, Miss Miller. It's a town full of people who came west for second chances. The banker who lost everything in the panic of '73. The schoolteacher who fled an abusive husband. The blacksmith who spent 5 years in prison for a crime his brother committed. Each one came here carrying their own burdens, their own shame. He turned to face her directly. Including me, Sadie's eyes widened. You? I wasn't always the respectable rancher you see now, Owen said with a rueful smile. After the war I was lost, angry. Drank too much, fought too often, wasted 2 years of my life before a preacher in Kansas City helped me find my way back. That's why I understand about needing a fresh start. His honesty stunned her. Yet you go to church now, you're accepted in town. Because I learned something important, Owen replied. Shame only has power if you let it define you. The past is written, but tomorrow's pages are blank. What matters is what you write on them from here on out. Sadie wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that her past mistakes and misjudgments didn't have to determine her future. But years of ingrained propriety and the brutal lessons of Philadelphia society were not so easily dismissed. I should check on the pie, she said, rising abruptly. It should be cool enough to cut now. Owen didn't press her, merely nodded and followed her inside, where they shared apple pie and careful conversation about safer topics, the drought threatening the eastern counties, the new schoolhouse being built in town, the wild horses Owen hoped to catch in the hills beyond the ranch. Later, lying in Mrs. Gunderson's narrow bed, Sadie replayed their conversation, Owen's words about second chances echoing in her mind as she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sadie threw herself into making the ranch house a home, scrubbing floors, hanging curtains sewn from feed sacks, planting herbs in the kitchen garden that had gone to seed. Owen and his men worked from dawn to dusk, moving cattle, mending fences, breaking horses in the corral behind the barn. In the evenings, they would often sit on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes in companionable silence. Sadie learned about Owen's dreams for the ranch, his hopes to expand his herd, perhaps build a larger house someday. In turn, she shared fragments of her own past, her childhood in a modest Philadelphia home. Her parents' deaths from influenza when she was 16. Her determination to support herself as a teacher rather than marry for security, as so many orphaned girls did. What she didn't expect was how quickly Silver Creek Ranch began to feel like home, or how often she found herself watching Owen the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the careful gentleness of his hands when he tended an injured calf, the respect he showed to everyone from the youngest cowhand to the elderly widow who ran the general store. Sunday mornings became a silent ritual of avoidance. Owen would saddle his horse and ride to town for church services, always with the same quiet invitation, "You're welcome to join me," and Sadie would always decline, busying herself with tasks that couldn't possibly wait until afternoon. One sweltering August Sunday, nearly 2 months after her arrival at Silver Creek, Sadie found herself restless. The house was spotless, bread was baked for the week, and even the mending basket was empty. With nothing to occupy her hands, her mind wandered to Philadelphia, to Theodore, to the humiliation that still burned when she allowed herself to remember. Needing escape, she grabbed a shawl and walked down to the creek, following its winding path through a stand of cottonwoods until she reached a small pool where the water deepened and slowed. Here, in the dappled shade, she removed her shoes and stockings and dipped her feet in the cool water, closing her eyes against the memory of another creek, another lifetime ago. "Penny for your thoughts." Sadie startled, nearly slipping off the rock where she sat. Owen stood a few yards away, his church clothes exchanged for work denims, hat in hand. "You're back early," she said, quickly withdrawing her feet from the water, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of her bare ankles. Service was short today. Pastor had a wedding in the next county. Owen approached, sitting on a neighboring rock. "Mind some company," Sadie shook her head, though her heart raced at his proximity. Over the weeks, she'd become increasingly aware of Owen not just as her employer, but as a man, a kind, honorable man whose rare smiles made her pulse quicken in a way Theodore's practiced charm never had. "How was the sermon?" she asked, focusing on retying her bootlaces. "About forgiveness. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving oneself." Owen skipped a stone across the pool. "Made me think of you," Sadie tensed. "Mr. Galloway, Owen," he corrected gently. "After all this time, I think we can dispense with formalities, don't you?" "Owen," she conceded. "I appreciate your concern, but my relationship with God is complicated." "I don't think it's God you're avoiding," he said quietly. "I think it's the judgment of others, the whispers, the speculation. Can you blame me, after what happened in Philadelphia?" "No," he interrupted. "I don't blame you at all, but I worry about you, Sadie. You've built a life here at Silver Creek, but it's only half a life if you're afraid to venture beyond the ranch boundaries, afraid to claim your place in the community." His use of her given name, so rare and intimate, made her breath catch. "What if they reject me? What if they discover my past and turn against me like everyone in Philadelphia did?" Owen's eyes held her steadily. "Then we'll face it together." "Together," Sadie repeated, the word trembling with unasked questions. "Sadie." Owen moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Surely you must know by now how I feel about you, how much you've come to mean to me." The declaration she'd both longed for and dreaded hung in the air between them. "Owen, I'm not the woman you think I am. I'm damaged goods, as they say." "No," he said firmly. "You're a woman who was betrayed by someone who should have protected you. That doesn't make you damaged, it makes you human. But the scandal is behind you. This is Redemption Creek, remember, a place for second chances." His thumbs traced circles on her palms. "I'm not asking for promises, Sadie. I'm just asking for a chance for us to see where this feeling between us might lead." Sadie looked down at their joined hands, calloused and strong around her smaller ones. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of me, of hoping, of believing this could be real." Owen's smile was gentle. "Then we'll take it slow, but there's one thing I'd like you to consider." He took a deep breath. "Come to church with me next Sunday." Sadie pulled her hands away. "I can't." "You can," he insisted. "Not for the townsfolk, not even for God if you're not ready. But for yourself, to prove that you have nothing to be ashamed of." The very thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. "They'll talk." "They already do," Owen said pragmatically. "You're the mysterious woman living at Galloway's ranch. Might as well give them something real to talk about." Despite her fear, Sadie found herself smiling at his bluntness. "And what would that be?" that Owen Galloway is courting Sadie Miller properly, starting with escorting her to church services. Courting, the word hung between them, filled with promise and possibility. I'll think about it, Sadie said finally. That's all I ask. Owen stood, offering his hand to help her up. Now, I believe Mrs. Gunderson sent a letter saying she's well enough to return next month. We should discuss what that means for your position here. The reminder that her time at Silver Creek might be ending sent a pang through Sadie's heart. I suppose I'll need to find other employment. Or, Owen said carefully, you could stay on, not as a housekeeper, but as something else, something else. Sadie echoed, her heart thundering in her chest. Let's see how Sunday goes first, Owen replied with a small smile. One step at a time, remember. Throughout the week, Sadie vacillated between determination and terror at the thought of attending church. She washed and pressed her best dress, a navy blue cotton with white piping that had seen better days, but was still presentable. She polished her boots until they gleamed and mended a tear in her only pair of good gloves. By Sunday morning, she was a bundle of nerves, pacing the kitchen as Owen hitched the wagon. We don't have to do this, he said when he found her white-faced at the kitchen table. Not if it causes you such distress. His concern nearly undid her. No, Sadie said, straightening her shoulders. You were right. I need to do this for myself. The ride to town was mostly silent, Sadie rehearsing what she would say if questioned, how she would hold her head if whispers followed her. Owen seemed to understand her need for mental preparation and didn't press conversation beyond occasional comments about the weather and the condition of the road. As they approached Redemption Creek, the church bell began to toll, calling the faithful to worship. The white clapboard building with its modest steeple stood at the end of Main Street, steps already filling with townsfolk in their Sunday best. Owen drew the wagon to a halt a short distance away. Ready? Sadie nodded, though her hands trembled as he helped her down. With her arm tucked in his, they walked toward the church, each step requiring more courage than the last. People noticed them immediately. Conversations paused, heads turned, eyes widened in recognition and curiosity. Sadie felt the weight of their stares like physical pressure, threatening to crush her resolve. Breathe, Owen murmured, his hand steady over hers. You're doing fine. At the bottom of the church steps, Sadie froze. Beyond those doors lay judgment, whispers, speculation, everything she'd fled from in Philadelphia. Her breath came in short gasps, dark spots dancing at the edge of her vision. I can't, she whispered, pulling away from Owen. I'm sorry, I thought I could, but I can't. Understanding dawned in Owen's eyes, followed by determination. Gently, he turned her to face him, his hands warm on her shoulders. Sadie Miller, he said, his voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear, God knows you're mine, and that's enough. The simplicity of his declaration, the public acknowledgement of his feelings, the assertion that they belonged together regardless of church or community approval left Sadie speechless. The Almighty knows what's in our hearts, Owen continued, his eyes never leaving hers. He knows your worth far better than any person who might judge you, but if you're not ready to face them, then we'll go home. Together. Something broke open inside Sadie at his words, a dam of fear and shame that had held her captive for too long. Tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow but of release. No, she said softly. No, I want to stay with you. Owen's smile was like sunrise. Then we'll face them together. Hand in hand, they climbed the steps, past the curious onlookers, past the raised eyebrows and whispered comments. At the church door, Pastor Reynolds greeted them with a warm handshake. Miss Miller, I'm delighted you've joined us today, he said, as if her presence was the most natural thing in the world. Owen's told me so much about you. Inside, Owen led her to a pew midway down the aisle. As they settled, Sadie was acutely aware of glances thrown their way, but the expected hostility didn't materialize. Instead, Mrs. Bloomfield from the boarding house nodded in recognition, and the storekeeper's wife actually smiled. When the service began, Sadie found herself drawn into the familiar rhythms of worship, the hymns she'd known since childhood, the scripture readings that had once brought her comfort, the sense of community that transcended individual differences. Beside her, Owen's strong voice joined the congregation in song, his presence a steadying anchor. Pastor Reynolds' sermon, fittingly enough, was about new beginnings, about the grace that allows broken people to become whole again, about communities that embrace rather than exclude. Sadie couldn't help wondering if Owen had somehow orchestrated this, but the genuine passion in the pastor's voice suggested these were long-held convictions. After the service, Sadie braced herself for the social gauntlet of exiting the church. To her surprise, people were welcoming, cautiously curious, perhaps, but not hostile. Mrs. Abernathy, the milliner, complimented her bonnet. The blacksmith's wife invited them both to dinner the following week. Even Mabel from the cafe, who had been so judgmental that first day, approached with a tentative smile. "Good to see you in church, Miss Miller," she said. "We always need more voices in the choir if you're inclined." By the time they reached the wagon, Sadie felt as if she'd passed through a storm to find unexpected sunshine on the other side. The weight that had pressed on her shoulders for so long seemed lighter, more manageable. "Well," Owen asked as he helped her up to the seat. "Was it as terrible as you feared?" Sadie shook her head, words momentarily beyond her. It wasn't until they were on the open road, church spire receding behind them, that she found her voice again. "Thank you," she said simply, "for making me brave." Owen's hand found hers, warm and sure. "You were always brave, Sadie. You just needed to remember it." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of hooves and creak of wagon wheels providing a soothing backdrop to Sadie's tumultuous thoughts. "Did you mean what you said?" she finally asked. "On the church steps." "About me being yours." Owen slowed the wagon, turning to face her fully. "Every word," he said, his eyes serious. "I love you, Sadie Miller. I think I have since that first day when you stood outside the church looking like a lost soul who'd finally found her way home. How could you know?" She whispered, "How could you be so sure about me when I wasn't even sure about myself?" "Some things you just know," he replied simply, "like when a storm is coming or when a horse can be trusted. I looked at you and knew you were the one I'd been waiting for, even if you weren't ready to hear it yet." Tears filled Sadie's eyes again. "And now, what happens now?" "Now," Owen said, his smile gentle, "I ask you properly if you'll consider becoming Mrs. Galloway. Not right away, we'll court proper-like, give the town something real to talk about, but eventually, when you're ready." The future unfurled before Sadie like a road bathed in sunrise, uncertain in its details but brilliant with promise. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she allowed herself to imagine belonging somewhere to someone without fear or shame. "Yes," she said, the words simple but profound. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Owen's smile was radiant as he leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both a question and an answer, a beginning and a promise. Against all odds, Sadie Miller had found redemption not in a church or a town that shared its name, but in the steadfast heart of a man who saw her not for her past, but for all she could become. And as they continued toward Silver Creek Ranch, toward home, Sadie finally understood what Owen had tried to tell her all along. That shame only had power if she gave it permission, and that love, true love, saw beyond the scars to the heart beneath.